The Chicago White Sox made another impressive leadership hire, but wouldn't it be nice if they made some impressive free agent signings instead? Let's discuss next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, White Sox manager Will Venable announced who his bench coach will be, and it got me thinking, wouldn't it be nice if the White Sox made some impressive free agent signings and trades right now rather than some impressive leadership hires? And I want to discuss that in the first segment. Then let's dive into Tampa's stadium drama and examine how that impacts the White Sox relocation fears. And finally, it's Wednesday, so let's do a Way Back Wednesday segment on Albert Belle, since his historic free agent signing happened 28 years ago and a day yesterday. So you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so I got the news that new manager Will Venable named Walter McKinven, Walter McKinven, his bench coach from Dave Gasper, site expert of Reviewing the Brew, part of the Fansided Network. He messaged me on Slack saying that this is a massive, massive hire, and that McKinven did the game planning, pitch sequencing, and catching development for the Brewers drink. And it got me wondering, wouldn't it be nice if the Sox actually made exciting player acquisitions rather than front office and coaching hires, which they're doing right now? I mean, think about it. The team just lost a record-breaking 121 games. And here you and I are needing to get excited about hiring a new manager, creating a director of hitting, revamping the data and analytics department, and now calling it basically research and development, and the international scouting. And I'm thinking, am I now also supposed to be excited over a bench coaching hire? You know, wouldn't it be nice to get messages and news that the White Sox are signing and trading for better players to improve their lot in the standings? But then I have to remind myself, and I got to take a deep breath and realize, actually, the leadership moves have to be made first before any of these major player acquisition moves can be made at all. You know, even if it's 2 years from now, you've got to rebuild the front office. Because if the Sox are going to do this monumental rebuild right, splash free agent signings, they're going to have to come way, way later in the process. You know, major trades, way, way, way later in the process. We are literally at the starting line because of how rotted and decayed the White Sox front office and clubhouse leadership had become under previous leaders, Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn. And then obviously the horrible management of Pedro Grifol. So while it is uncomfortable to trust Chris Getz, and so far, I will say this, one of the reasons why maybe he might be able to start to get comfortable is he's past the hiring and reorganizing the front office benchmark. He has passed that. He's made some very impressive hirings when he first came onto the job. You know, getting Josh Barfield from the Arizona Diamondbacks, getting Brian Bannister from the San Francisco Giants to be the head of pitching. And then he goes and gets someone from the New York Mets to run the international scouting. You know, he brought in Will Venable, who had that impressive resume that prepared him to be a manager. You know, think about it. Gets basically a 1-year front office apprenticeship under the best general manager of all time, Theo Epstein. And then he gets on the field leadership training under Joe Maddon with the Cubs, Alex Cora with the Red Sox, and Bruce Bochy with the Rangers. They've tapped into the Baltimore Orioles to get their director of hitting and Ryan Fuller. Obviously, I mentioned Brian Bannister to be the head of pitching. And having these two run how the organization hits and pitches is huge, as both are forward-thinking baseball people. And think about that. When was the last time you could say the White Sox had forward-thinking baseball people? Never. They had a very aggressive executive in Kenny Williams, obviously, at the beginning of the decade. You know, he was always going for it, and it did turn out with the 2005 World Series. But otherwise, you can never say, hey, the White Sox really had some forward-thinking guys. You know, Rick Hahn, he was a smart guy, but I think he came to believe that he was the smartest guy in the room. And that allowed him to become arrogant and kind of look at the White Sox problems and be like, well, ask me after the parade. You know, he just kind of put his head in the sand, especially after Tony La Russa was hired as the manager when he wanted AJ Hinch. Instead of doing the right thing and quitting, he just put his head in the sand and basically said, ask me after the parade. When it was like, there's no way. You're rotting. You're decaying. You're not getting the owner to realize that it's not 2005 anymore. But having Fuller and Bannister now be in charge of how you pitch and hit from the complex league to the major leagues is very important, because you want to have the same standards from complex to major league. So everybody understands that this is how we're going to play baseball. This is how we're going to play winning baseball. Now you have to get comfortable with the idea that, does Getz even know what winning baseball looks like? But at least he's tapping into other organizations that know what winning hitting looks like, and know what winning pitching looks like, and know just what winning in general looks like. And now they've tapped into the Brewers organization to bring in Venable's right-hand man in Walter McKinven. Who knows if he'll have the same duties as he had with the Brewers? But you do have a coach with a proven track record of making players better. William Contreras turned into a very good defensive catcher to complement his impressive offensive game under McKinven. Also, it can never hurt to bring in somebody who's worked for Craig Counsell and Matt Arnold, who's one of the best executives in baseball, and then also now the new NL Manager of the Year, Pat Murphy. You get three guys. You get a guy that works under those three guys. It can never hurt to have that in your organization. And again, you're bringing somebody in from outside the organization, and an organization that the Sox should mirror in the Brewers drink. Because obviously I want to see Getz take what the Cleveland Guardians, the Milwaukee Brewers drink, and Tampa Bay Rays do, and then apply some big market spending. Okay? Basically become the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I know you say, well, that will never happen because Jerry Reinsdorf still owns his team. But eventually the team will be sold. And hopefully it'll stay in Chicago, and I'll discuss that in the second segment. And hopefully it'll be to a deep-pocketed owner who will realize, hey, what do the Dodgers do? Well, they do what the Guardians and the Rays do. And then they just spend money to put themselves over the top, because that's what you should be doing. So now that the front office has been reformed, it's time to look at the coaching staff. Obviously, the coaching staff had to be reformed. You bring in Will Venable. Although the only thing that I'm not too pleased with is it sounds like pitching coach Ethan Katz and hitting coach Marcus Thames are being retained. And I think it was important, and I know CHGO's and former host of the show, Herb Lawrence, was harping on this, and I agree with him that they should have just blown out the entire coaching staff. The only person that should have been retained, and even then put him in probably in the front office, is interim manager Grady Sizemore. And, Doug Sisson for being just an old school guy. Justin Jershell, you could have sent back to AAA. But really just blow out the staff and allow him to bring in guys that he wants to work with. Allow Venable to form his own staff. And now that, keep bringing in guys from outside the organization. Get fresh perspectives, new ideas. But I'm going to minimize, and you could say, well, it's wishy-washy. I'm not wishy-washy, because I'm going to minimize getting upset, because Katz and Thames are the equivalent of being caddies to a pro golfer. Bannister described his role, and I remember listening to this on the White Sox Talk podcast. Chuck Garfine, you should always check that out. Just make me first. But Bannister described his role as basically being a swing coach of a professional golfer. In this metaphor, he's going to be the one working with the pro golfer Monday through Wednesday, and then maybe on the driving range before tee time. But he isn't carrying the bag. So if you have that structure of Katz and Thames working with players for the actual game, I'm fine with that. I just want some people, I've said this multiple times. One of the duties of the manager and even the coaching staff should be is working with the big league roster to make sure everyone is ready to play and win the game in front of them. Keep going 1-0 for every single game, one game at a time. And I know it's a grind, but that's what you need out of your manager and coaching staff. The organization should take care of the player development and improvement. Now, that doesn't mean the White Sox should not have guys like McKinven chime in with ideas to help players get better. I'm not saying that. Again, fresh perspectives, fresh idea. But the main job responsibilities of these guys should be is prepare the team to win the game in front of them. And then Venable, as the manager, take the information that he has from the front office, the research and the R&D, and take that to make the best informed in-game decisions. And, basically the stereotypical coaches, though, that you have, the bench, the hitting, the pitching, the first and third base coach, they should be helping Venable prepare the players to win the game in front of them. And you can hire special titled assistant coaches to work on the nuts and bolts, even at the big league, that Bannister and Fuller deem must be worked on. You can do that. I mean, that's what McKinven's job title was basically. He was I think the director of run prevention for the big league team. I mean, you can have those micro to help work on the, getting players better at the big league level to be extensions of Fuller and Bannister. And I even said, I want a director of fielding and have a director of base running. So that way you have the standards all in place through all 5 levels of the organization. Have somebody work on developing the actual hit the ball once the ball is hit, running to the bases, how we're going to run the bases. Obviously, then on the flip side, the run prevention, the pitching and the defense. Although a lot of that defense is just making sure you have better data and analytics to know where to be when a guy's at the plate. And that's the thing the Sox have never been good at. That's another reason why these leadership moves are so important. The Sox have been acting like a front office that's operating in the 90s, and they need to be operating now 30 years forward. They need to be operating like a front office should be operating in 2024 and in 2025. And getting better players, yes, it would be nice. But if you're going to implement what Fuller is going to bring in and having Brian Bannister already in charge of the pitching, you need to get those players probably through the draft and international free agent markets, because you can mold and influence younger players. Kind of hard to do sometimes with established players. It can be done, especially if they're desperate to stay in the show, but it's a lot easier to say to somebody, here's how we're going to do it. And you do it and you're implementing it every day, day in, day out, from the complex league, then to low A, high A, double A, triple A. So the one measuring stick I will have in terms of player acquisition is if Getz taps into ties. I want him to tap into the ties of the players that Venable, McKinven, Fuller, and Bannister have from their previous stops. That's what I'm going to kind of be looking at this offseason, is when they're adding players to the roster, are they adding players with ties to those guys? Because one of the things that spoiled the White Sox 2024 season, especially from the start, was Getz and Pedro Grifol tapping into their Kansas City Royals connections. That just completely ruined it, because they either went with players already well past their prime in Mike Moustakas, or they were just never very good to begin with in Brad Keller. And they brought in a lot of those guys. They brought in like 8 or 9 former Kansas City Royals players. Okay. Before, obviously, now what you're seeing with the Kansas City Royals, and not only that, you brought in that period where, they weren't very good. It was after the World Series, their World Series run had ended. That's when they were bringing these guys in. Those are not the times to be tapping into the Royals when they were actually finishing worse than the White Sox in the standings. So I want to see, is he actually tapping in? That's why I thought, Austin Slater was a fine signing, because he had a brief tie to Adam Fuller. And if you can get Slater back to his days of crushing lefties, it'll be a good signing. That's why, maybe Gary Sanchez. The Sox are looking for a backup catcher. Gary Sanchez worked with McKinven in Milwaukee. Carson Keller. He would also not be, it wouldn't be a headline stealing catching signing, but he's been with Venable in Texas. And yes, they are going to target a catcher or even a backup catcher, because they want to give top 5 prospect Edgar Carroll more seasoning. So those are, again, 2 players that I would look at as maybe those are some guys that they should add. But molding players the way the Sox want with these impressive hires, they need to go with draft and development, which is why it's going to take some time. And that's what I replied back to Dave Gasper. He was like, this is huge, this is big. And I'm like, yeah, it is. After I took the deep breath, but I'm like, this is going to take some time, folks. And that's why 2027 might be the earliest that they're competitive, if some guys are ahead of the curve. Or again, 2027, they might be competitive because some of the guys they currently have, like Caro, Montgomery, Ramos, they actually turn into very good baseball players, impact baseball players. And then whoever they get in the Garrett Crochet trade. But I do have to admit, I get that meatball urge to be like, come on, let's see some good players on the field. Why are you not signing Willy Adames? Why are you not signing Anthony Santander? But I do realize, if you want to do this right, because it's a monumental rebuild, don't cut corners. Well, it looks like Nashville or Charlotte could steal a different MLB team as the Tampa Bay Rays' new stadium hopes took a dramatic turn, and now it's looking like it could be a possible relocation. So let's discuss if their threat of moving out of town should ease our fears of the Sox ever leaving Chicago next on Locked On White Sox. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And I always maintain FanDuel's spreads, over, under, and money lines are fun to play. And if you want to win big or at least double your money, FanDuel parlays, props, and futures is the way to go. So Chicago scoring first against Minnesota this Sunday, and it being a touchdown is a chance to almost triple your money, as it is at plus 290 the last time I checked. So you put $10 on that, and if it hits, you can win $29. And it is also plus 290 for the Bears scoring first and it being a field goal. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every effort more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so let me be clear. I do not believe taxpayers should be funding new stadiums for pro sports teams. I basically oppose socializing the costs and privatizing the profits, because that's what these owners are always trying to do when they try to tap into taxpayer money to fund their stadiums. They want you to pay for the costs, and they want to keep all the money. Obviously, I'm going to make exceptions for infrastructure costs, such as maybe roads, sewers, public transportation stops, since there is a full public benefit there. And you're probably going to use the road, even though, say you got to drive past. I mean, people drive on 35th and Shields all the time, not just to go to Guaranteed Rate Field. People do live in Bridgeport, contrary to public belief, and it's not violent as people think in Bridgeport, for example. And I don't even mind the concept of maybe even selling public land for less than market value if there's like a true vision to develop the land into something useful, especially if it's just been sitting vacant for years and just being an eyesore. I saw that happen in Milwaukee at Fiserv Forum. Now, granted, I would have preferred the taxpayers not get $1 for this land that Fiserv Forum is on, but it sat vacant for 20 years downtown, just sitting there, or like 15 years. It was doing nothing. So the Bucks owners came in with a vision to say, hey, here's how we're going to develop this over 10 to 15 years. We're going to revitalize this area because because again, a lot of bars and restaurants, small businesses, the backbone of the economy, were failing because the Bradley Center becomes so outdated. There was nothing else around it. So unless you had an event at the Bradley Center and dates were getting less and less and less filled, there are a lot of businesses failing. A lot of businesses going out of, in and out. But they had this vision. We're going to put hotels. We're going to put offices. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And it's starting to happen. But they said, hey, you give us this land, we will develop it. And they also did develop basically a private partnership, public-private partnership. Would have preferred not 50-50. I think the Bucks could have paid for a little bit more, but hey, it still was a partnership. That's the other thing. I'll make even an exception. Can you give me a partnership? But like, for example, what the White Sox are asking, it's not a partnership. The White Sox want $1.7 billion of a $1.9 billion stadium on the 78. It's not a partnership. And yes, while it's sitting vacant, 78 has been sitting vacant for decades. And I have no problem if they say, hey, we want an exit or an L stop. That you can entertain, okay? But the full, no. And I've even come to the conclusion even more about why teams should stop asking for taxpayer funds, because there's just so much dysfunction going on when you try to deal with politicians. In Pinellas County, hopefully I pronounced that right, and what the Rays are dealing with, my gosh, that is an absolute clown show right now. Well, because again, that's where the Rays are trying to build their new stadium in St. Petersburg. And holy heck, politics are playing out there is just, again, another reason to stay away from asking for public money. If you're a private organization, stick to the infrastructure. But if you actually want the brick and mortar costs covered by taxpayers, you better have somebody, like desperate, like Vegas or relocation. But if you're already established, try to find a way to fund your own stadium, because my gosh, one of the things you got to deal with is, you have these things called elections, and elected officials have egos, and then you got to put them in conflict with the egos of billionaires. And that's what it looks like right now. And why am I discussing the Rays' new stadium issue? Well, because Rays owner Stuart Sternberg is threatening relocation now. And if he follows through on that threat, well, it means one less city you and I have to worry about when, it comes to that. Just a dark cloud. I always put the White Sox moving at maybe 5%. It's a chance. I don't think it would happen because, again, why would MLB take out another team from the third biggest market when they could just expand to, say, Nashville and maybe even Salt Lake, collect $4 billion and keep another team in Chicago? Because there is some economic, help for the White Sox, especially since I'll get to the television contract that they want to work out next. But there is still this cloud because Reinsdorf, he's kind of floated, hey, I could move it too. I took a meeting with the Nashville mayor. Or again, whoever buys the team from his estate, because again, the team should be sold upon his death, is basically with his instructions. If they can't secure a new stadium in Chicago, or how about just develop the land around guaranteed rate? You could do that. But say that the Sox stadium issue is not, sorted out by 2029 when the lease runs out, you do have to kind of worry about those options. But if the Rays are leaving Tampa, that takes off at least one viable city that, the Sox could use as leverage to relocate. Because the Rays announced plans to build a new stadium in St. Petersburg, but that has been halted after county commissioners did not finalize bonds last month, and they have voted to delay again because the vote would, needed to be delayed because it wouldn't have passed. This is what WTSP.com had. Commission Vice Chair Brian Scott, who supports the deal, made the motion to delay the funding again, saying a vote on it would have failed. Quote, I don't think there were 4 votes, and I'll freely admit I was never the best at math, but I can count to 4, end quote. Rays co-presidents Brian Auld and Matt Silverman attended the meeting but did not speak, relying instead on the letter to the commission, which stated in part, quote, the county's failure to finalize the bonds ended the ability for a new ballpark by 2028, end quote. The letter added that the Rays cannot afford the additional costs of delaying the stadium opening by a year. Commissioners speculated on the Rays' intentions, with Scott suggesting there are 3 possible outcomes. Quote, either they were trying to put pressure on us to pass it today, they could be angling to renegotiate, or they may want out, end quote, he said. And here's one reason why you shouldn't ask taxpayer for money, because again, elections can change any deal. This is what the WTSP article had. The shift in votes today totals is attributed to the election of 2 new commissioners who replaced members who voted for the original agreement over the summer. Charlie Justice and Janet Long were replaced by Vince Nowicki and Chris Scherer. On his first day as commissioner, Scherer said he could be still swayed. Quote, I would like the chance to meet with them, talk to them about it. I'm not against the deal. I'm not for this deal. I want to make a good, sound financial decision for the people of Pinellas County, end quote. Now, Sternberg has already given now his vague threat of relocation when he made the statement. Quote, last month, the county commission upended our ballpark agreement by not approving their bonds as they promised to do. That action sent a clear message that we had lost the county as a partner. The future of baseball in Tampa became less certain after that vote. We're going to exhaust all that we can here until and unless it comes to that, end quote. Okay, so the difference between Sternberg and Jerry is Sternberg has already ran the part of having one foot out the door, because he actually ran the idea of splitting home cities with Montreal and Tampa. They were going to play, I think it was April and May, they were going to play in Tampa. And then I think they were going to do the summer, June, July, and August, and then come back in Montreal and then come back to Tampa in September. That was kind of the plan. Then they were going to have 2 smaller ballparks built. Obviously, Major League Baseball said, no, we're not doing that. And he also has at least gotten public officials to agree to a deal. Obviously, it looks dead. Jerry can't even get the Illinois Assembly to take a vote. They're basically saying no, which they should. But the reason you and I can breathe maybe a sigh of relief is Tampa is not the 3rd biggest market. Baseball can survive without a team in Tampa. Part of it is the transplants. Look at this, look at the attendance. They have a good team. and barely anybody goes to their games during the regular season. Now, you could say the same thing for the White Sox, obviously, but Tampa's always had trouble drawing. Part of it you could say is the ballpark, and one of the reasons that it ruined this relationship is is Tampa's going to play at George Steinbrenner Field this year after the dome got ruined in the hurricane. They're going to play their season in Tampa, the actual Tampa, and Pinellas County and St. Petersburg was livid about that. They felt that they should have played in one of the minor league parks in Clearwater. But again, MLB can survive if they don't have a team in Tampa. And also you can move them to one of the southern cities, and you might have a population that is at least familiar with the players. And say other than say a team from Chicago. Plus, again, the Rays would probably be one of the franchises Nashville could support as it exists, since they have a history of being a well-run organization. That's the other thing you want to tell some of these desperate cities for a franchise. Do you really want the White Sox coming to your city? Do you? Have you seen how they're run? So the other reason why I think the Sox, we should breathe with a sigh of relief is Commissioner Rob Manfred might actually have a vision. It's shocking, I know, but he's angling to have all regional broadcasts under one umbrella by 2028 and then sell that to streamers and other services. ESPN has been rumored to be talking about, I read that speculated that on the next contract, they would actually like to get more bang for their buck, and they would like to get the regional rights so that they can sell it as part of their ESPN Plus package, kind of like what they're doing with hockey. So imagine baseball sharing the revenue like the NFL, trying to become a national game. I know it's shocking, but I do think expansion is going to happen. I just think, I always keep saying, you just got to worry about who is the city that gets left out. But if there's a more attractive team, if there's the White Sox in terms of what's better run, I'm going to go after the Rays than the White Sox. Well, it's Wednesday, and that means way back Wednesday, so let's look back to when the White Sox shook the free agent market and signed Albert Belle, next on Locked On White Sox. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all of the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. And honestly, leave a 5-star review if you can. I'd appreciate it. There was a time when Jerry Reinsdorf actually gave out a record contract in free agency. I know, shocking. There's some Gen Zers out there that's like, wait, what? He actually used to spend money? Yeah. Granted, it was 28 years ago and a day when he signed Albert Belle to a record 5-year, $55 million deal. And 28 years later, the Sox record is $78 million now for Andrew Benintendi, when the going rate for premium talent and players with an F4 over a 2 is usually $100 million now. So that just shows you, yes, it's why you might be shocked. Your jaw might be dropping. And the funny thing is, the Sox signed Albert Belle away from their division rival, Cleveland, and they lost their mind. That city lost its darn mind, because how dare a superstar leave Cleveland? I remember they were just livid. And that's the thing, like Cleveland was like, at the time, it was like, do you understand the economics now of baseball and even just how players get paid? I would leave Cleveland, especially if somebody offered me a contract over $10 million. I'd get the heck out of Cleveland. Because I agree with Joakim Noah. Nobody ever says they're going to Cleveland for a vacation. And fans reportedly threw batteries at Belle on his return to Cleveland in a White Sox uniform. I remember that. Like, it was pretty bad. But I remember at the time it was a huge move for the Sox to make, especially after how the team took a step back in the standings in 1995 after that 1994 strike. The hope was Belle would team up with Frank Thomas and Robin Ventura in 1997 to put together one of the most potent offenses in the game, and it just never happened. Belle was great for the Sox in 2 seasons overall if you look at his entire career, but his first year was below his standards that he put up in Cleveland. He came to Chicago after having 3 straight seasons where he hit over 300 and had an OPS over 1,000. 97, he hit 274 with an 823 OPS, did crush 30 home runs, but just finished as a 1.5 BWAR player. Solid numbers, but it was one of the many disappointments of that season. I think he kind of was like, I got to live up to this contract, dealing with all the Cleveland nonsense. Also didn't help that Robin Ventura broke his leg, and that fearsome trio never really materialized. Obviously, too, the biggest dysfunction of 97 happened when Reinsdorf went from being a big spending owner to alienating the entire fan base by saying the infamous, anyone who thinks this team can catch Cleveland is crazy. They were 3.5 out, but yet Reinsdorf didn't think they could catch him, so he orders, the trade of pitchers Wilson Alvarez and Roberto Hernandez in the infamous white flag trade. Although the funny thing is, Belle made the All-Star team in 97. Didn't make it in 98 when he came back with a vengeance. Finished as a 7.1 B-WAR player, set the record for the most home runs in a season for the White Sox when he crushed 49. Didn't miss a game at all either. He hit 328 with a 1.055 OPS that included a 655 slugging percentage. He had an OPS plus of 172. The problem in 98, though, was that was the year Frank Thomas hit just 265 and hit 29 home runs. In 97, Thomas won the American League batting title with a 347 average. And that was also a big problem when Thomas and Belle dynamic. None of them can match up career seasons in the same season. 97, you had Belle kind of having that down year, and Thomas was great. And then in 98, it was Belle having a great year, and Thomas starting to deal with those personal issues that declined his game. Belle's stay was a short one, though, on the South Side, and they didn't win a ton of games either. I think they were always under 500. I think they were 80 and 81 in 97. And because I think a game got rained out, and they definitely did not really threaten Cleveland in the standings, except for that 3.5 game where they were behind, and then the white flag trade happened. But it was a short one on the South Side, as he had an out in his contract that allowed him to become a free agent if he was not among the 3 highest paid players in baseball. And by the offseason heading into 99, his $55 million record deal at the time was broken a few times. And then he left for Baltimore in free agency. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow with the discussion on benchmarks Chris Getz must clear to actually have us feel comfortable with his leadership. And feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the team actually needing to make leadership hires first before any big free agent moves, how the Tampa Bay Rays stadium issue impacts the White Sox, and way back Wednesday discussing Albert Belle's brief time on the South Side. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.